Everything in our world, except for energy, is made up of atoms. And atoms come in different forms. Like there's different elements, like the helium atom, the hydrogen atom, and they combine together to make everything. Now, atoms are actually made up of something else. We call these subatomic particles, and they're made up of three different types. The first is the proton. These are positively charged particles that live in the nucleus, in the middle. They have a mass of 1, and they determine the type of element. Next, we have the neutron, the neutral neutron. These live in the nucleus, keeping all of those positive charges tightly held together. They have a mass of 1, and they determine the stability of that nucleus. Finally, we have the electron. These are tiny negatively charged particles that live outside of the nucleus in what we call the electron shell or electron cloud, and they have a charge of -1. They determine the charge of the particle and its reactivity. Now we're going to practice building an atom. One by one, we're going to add protons to our atom. You'll see that each time we add a proton, the charge increases by 1, the mass increases by 1, and the element changes. Let's see that again. Now we're going to start adding some neutrons to our nucleus. One at a time, we add the neutrons, and we see that while the mass of the atom increases, the charge of it stays the same, as does the element identity. Protons and neutrons are crammed together in what we call the nucleus. This is the dense, tiny center of the atom where all of the mass is held. Outside of the nucleus is the electron cloud. This is where the electrons live. Electrons arrange themselves around the atom in what we call energy levels. The first energy level can hold 2 electrons, the next one can hold up to 8. Now, as electrons are added to the atom, you will see that the charge of the atom is getting less positive or getting closer to 0 for each electron that we add. Mass, however, and element do not change when we add the electrons. Let's watch the addition of the electrons again. This is what we call an atom. It has the nucleus in the center and it's surrounded by electrons. We also think of atoms as being neutrally charged, meaning that they have a charge of 0. Now you'll find that not all atoms of the same element have the exact same mass. This is something called an isotope. Isotopes are a variation on an atom that has a different number of neutrons. Remember, neutrons, they don't determine element identity, nor do they determine charge. And so all they do is determine the stability of the nucleus. And some elements can be stable with different numbers of neutrons. So the atom that we made here, an atom of carbon, it actually has 2 different isotopes. One is carbon-12. It has a mass of 12, meaning it has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. And the other is actually carbon-14, meaning it has a mass of 14 and has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. Carbon-14 is actually radioactive, so that happens sometimes, because even though it comes in that form of having the 8 neutrons, that isn't actually as stable as having just 6 for that atom. There's also something called an ion. Now, an ion is another form of an atom, and in this case, an ion has a charge. It is either positively charged or it is negatively charged. If it's negatively charged, what that means is that it has more electrons than it does protons. If it's positively charged, it has more protons than it does electrons. Let's take away 1 electron from this atom. Immediately we see that now the charge is positive, meaning we have fewer electrons than we do protons. Now let's add that electron back and add a friend. we see that each time we add an electron, the overall charge of the atom got more negative. First went from +1 to 0, which is more negative than +1, and then went to -1, meaning that we had one more electron than we did proton. To make our atom back at a charge of 0, we have to add another proton. By doing this, it actually changes the identity of the atom to a nitrogen. So now it's no longer carbon, but rather is nitrogen. Now let's just take out that extra neutron. We don't need that. Nitrogen is cool because it can actually hold up to 3 extra electrons. So we see what we have added each of those electrons to this now ion of nitrogen. We have a total charge of -3. So that means that it has 3 extra electrons. It has 3 more electrons than it does protons. Let's review what we've learned today. First, we've learned what an atom is. It is a single unit of an element and is usually neutral or has a charge of 0. We have isotopes. These are variations on an atom that have different masses, meaning that some of them have different numbers of neutrons in their nucleuses. Finally, we have ions. These are charged atoms. These are atoms where the number of protons and electrons are not equal. Remember, electrons determine how reactive an element is, an atom is, and so sometimes having an ion form of the atom makes it more reactive.